Hi, my name is Kaini. Welcome to Booktopia Lessons. Do you know that the countries, companies, institutions, and organizations in the world use eagle as an emblem in their flags, logos, and coats of arms? Even motivational speakers use this regal bird as a metaphor in their motivational speeches to inspire people. In today's video, I'll discuss how the English poet Alfred Lord Tennyson observes this majestic bird through his poetic eye. The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Before we discuss the poem, let's get to know about the poet. Alfred Lord Tennyson was one of the leading poets who lived during the 19th century England. He was born in 1809 in Lincolnshire. He published his first poetry collection in 1827 under the name Poems by Two Brothers. He was appointed as a poet laureate in 1850 by the British government. A poet laureate is a poet appointed by a government or an organization to write poetry to commemorate events of people of national or cultural significance. The poet laureates write about state occasions and public events as well. Tennyson, as a poet laureate, had the luxury of associating Queen Victoria closely. Now remember, he lived during the Victorian era. It's said that the Queen Victoria found comfort in reading Tennyson's one of the brilliant poems, In Memoriam, after the death of her husband Prince Albert. Interestingly, Tennyson wrote this poem after the untimely death of his close friend Arthur Hallam. Tennyson remained as a poet laureate till his death in 1892. Tennyson's poetry covers a wide variety of themes. Commonly addressed themes are love, death, nature, spirituality, human courage, perseverance and optimism, religious faith versus science, and glorification of England. Tennyson was a patriot and he celebrated the British Empire through his poetry. Some of his interesting poems are The Charge of the Light Brigade, In Memoriam, Break, 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 Crossing the Bar, Lotus Eaters, The Lady of Shalott. These are some of his famous quotes which give an insight to his poetry. Nothing in nature is unbeautiful. Tennyson was greatly inspired by nature and its unspoiled beauty. I am a part of all that I have met. They simply suggest how human personality is shaped by the experiences they get throughout their lives. It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Tennyson celebrated love and grief through his poetry. This extract, taken from the poem In Memoriam, written after the death of Arthur Hallam, was a clear evidence for that. As we are going to appreciate a poem written under the title The Eagle, let's get to know some fascinating facts about eagles. You know, eagles are large birds of prey and they are found in various regions of the world. They are known for their sharp talons and powerful beaks, which they use to capture and eat other animals, including fish, small mammals, and reptiles. Eagles are typically found in open habitats such as deserts, grasslands, and forest. Eagles are large birds. They have sharp, hooked beaks and powerful talons. They have keen eyesight and can spot prey from great distances, making them effective hunters. They are also known for their powerful wings and strong flight abilities. Interestingly, eagles have been used as a metaphor in most of the motivational speeches. The speakers love to talk about their 5-month painful process of rebirth. But interestingly, there are no scientific evidences to support this idea, and this can simply be a popular urban myth. You know that eagle is a bird of prey that has been used as a symbol by many cultures and nations throughout history. It commonly symbolizes freedom, strength, power, authority, patriotism, courage, honor, and even warrior spirit. Countries like Albania, Mexico, Egypt, and Kazakhstan have eagle in their national flags as the emblem. The eagle is also used as the emblem in the Great Seal of the United States of America and the US Air Force. Some of the world-famous companies have used eagle in their branding as well. Let's recite the poem. The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. He clasped the crag with crooked hands, close to the sun in lonely lands. Ringed with the azure world, he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt, he falls. Now I will explain the poem line by line. In the first line, the writer says, he clasped the crag with crooked hands. He here in the very beginning of the poem, we all know it's a personification. The writer has personified the bird using the third person masculine singular pronoun he. Clasp means to grasp or to hold something tightly or firmly. The crag with crooked hands. Crag here is a cliff of a mountain. Now, in this case, it's situated quite close to the beach with crooked hands. Now, this is a reference to the talons of the bird. Now, these talons are really ugly, horrible looking. So, that's why the writer says crooked. So, it can be taken as twisted talons. Or another meaning, gnarled, twisted and gnarled talons. So in the first line, the writer has used personification and also this visual imagery of the twisted talons using the phrase crooked hands. And here hands is also example for personification because the birds, they do not have hands, only humans have. So using this word, the writer has personified the bird. Second line, close to the sun in lonely lands. The bird has perched in a cliff, and this particular cliff is quite close to the sun. So the whole phrase can be taken as a hyperbole. Why? It's an exaggeration. No creature can be quite close to the sun. In lonely lands. Why lonely lands? This simply suggests the hyperbole is used to suggest the height of the particular mountain cliff, right? It's a very tall mountain cliff. So therefore the writer has used the hyperbole here. And lonely lands. Now lonely lands, we know it's an example for alliteration as well. And even in the first line, the writer has used an alliteration. Clasp, crag and crooked. K sound is repeated in the beginning of the words in this particular line. So we know it's an alliteration. Third line, ringed with the azure world he stands. So here apostrophe suggests the missing E. Ringed means surrounded. Surrounded with the azure world. Azure is the bright blue color. bright blue color. So what does this mean? The clear sky, clear blue sky. Ringed with the azure world, he cannot see any of the other landmarks, buildings, trees, or any of these things, only the blue sky. He stands. Once again, this word is an example for personification. Right. Now I hope the meaning of the first triplet, there are only 3 lines in the first stanza. These 3 lines can be taken as a triplet. Right? Then let's go to the second triplet. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. Now, wrinkles can be seen on the skin of an old person, very old person, right? The sea waves have been compared to the wrinkles. Usually, the sea waves are really huge, colossal waves. But here the writer has reduced the power of the ocean or the sea by using wrinkled and the word crawl. Sea beneath him crawls. So the power is reduced here, power of the sea. And also this line suggests once again, like in the second slide, height of the bird's nest or where the bird has perched, right? The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He, once again personification, watches from his mountain walls. Mountain walls. This is a naturally built fortress, not a man-made fortress, but a natural one. He is protected from the mountains. So this is the setting of the poem is quite clear. It's a mountainous terrain. So he is protected from these walls, mountain walls. And its a technique is a metaphor. Even in this fourth line, wrinkle sea it's an example for metaphor. Right. He watches from his mountain walls. What does he do? He observes the world like a monarch or a king or a dictator. Observes. Now, if it's a king, he observes his subjects, the citizens of the country. So the same way the bird observes everything very carefully. And then finally the writer says, like a thunderbolt. So we know that this is a simile. Why? The flight of the bird. Flight of the bird is compared to a thunderbolt. So it's a simile like a thunderbolt. He falls. Interestingly, the writer does not say he flies. Instead of that word, he uses falls. What does this mean? It simply suggests the bird's agility, swiftness, and how quickly he can move. So falls here means he simply dives down onto the sea. Why? Simply to catch its prey. So here thunderbolt simply suggests destructiveness. So this is so destructive to its prey. Now here its prey can be fish. Right. Simply this is the meaning of the 2 stanzas. I hope it's clear to you. Now let's go to the paraphrase of the poem. A paraphrase of a poem is actually the meaning of the poem on our own words. For those who need more clarification of the poem, you can read the paraphrase at the end of the explanation of the poem. The eagle holds the rocky cliff so firmly with his twisted talons on a tall solitary mountain top which seems quite close to the sun. He stands there surrounded by the blue sky. Down below the cliff where he perches on the waves of the ocean look like wrinkles. He observes the world around him from his fort. Suddenly, he dives down to the sea as fast as thunder. Now let's discuss the themes and the techniques of the poem The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So, the very first theme of this poem can be taken as majesty of the bird eagle. Throughout the poem, the writer describes the actions or the behavior of this royal bird, the majestic bird, the eagle. We know that the bird eagle is considered as the king of the bird's world. So, first theme is majesty of the bird eagle. So, as the second theme, we can take glorification of nature. Why? The bird eagle is part of nature. So, it's not just the bird eagle, but other elements of nature are presented here as well. For example, crag, the sun, then the azure world or the bright blue sky, the sea, the mountains, thunderbolts. So, all these are elements of nature. So, that's why this poem is given under nature category as well. He glorifies nature or the elements of nature. Third theme is inspiration of nature. So, Tennyson wrote this poem as a result of his frequent visit to the Pyrenees, the mountain range in Europe. So he was inspired by nature to write this poem. Not just Tennyson, most of the poets write poems inspired by nature. So inspiration of nature can be another theme. Then dual aspect of nature. What is duality presented here? Both the negative and the positive and the negative side of all the aspects of nature. In the positive aspects, we can take all the positive things like beauty, comfort, glorification given by Mother Nature to the humans. And also, nature is not always positive, or it does not give all the positive things, but sometimes it can be really destructive. Now, a good example is the second stanza. The writer mentions about thunderbolt. Now, thunderbolt by nature is quite destructive to human beings. So, dual aspect of nature is presented through these simple stanzas. And autocratic power. Now, Tennyson was the poet laureate. He lived during the Victorian period, and this was the time where the British Empire was at its peak. And the British Empire was called as the empire where sun never sets. Sun never sets on the British Empire. And so this poem suggests British patriotism as well. And also, the eagle can be taken as a symbol of dictatorship. Or this symbol, the bird suggests autocratic power, dictatorship. So, autocratic power is another theme. And finally, transient nature of nature. Nature changes all the time. It's not something fixed. So, here in this, the first stanza, the writer gives quite a beautiful picture of nature. Azure world he stands. But in the second stanza, he brings out a negative side. So nature changes quickly. So in 1 minute, it's quite beautiful and soothing to the human beings. At the very next minute, it can change into something destructive. So transient nature of nature is another theme. What are the techniques Tennyson has used in this poem? Now, the very first technique that you can mention here is actually simple diction, simple language. Even an average reader can read this and understand the poem. So, it's a very simple poem written using simple diction. And the The other technique can be taken as personification. So in my analysis, I pointed out all the examples for personification. I'll go through it once again. He use the third person pronoun he throughout the poem is used to personify the bird. Other than that, the word hands and stands and watches. These words are used to personify the bird eagle. Another technique the writer has used is simile. In the very last line, the writer compares the flight of the bird to a thunderbolt. Like a thunderbolt, he falls. So this is an example for simile. In simile, we know we use the word like. The other technique is metaphor. Once again, a way of comparing two things. So in metaphors, we don't use the words like or as. It's directly said. Now here, Asia world. Asia world is a metaphor. Mountain walls is a metaphor. Wrinkle sea is a metaphor. So there are three metaphors. And the other technique is visual imagery. Now the writers use their words in poetry to create mental picture in the reader's mind. So this particular account of the bird eagle creates a beautiful picture about this majestic bird, the eagle, as well as about the other elements of nature as well. And then auditory imagery. Usually the writers use onomatopoeic words to create auditory imagery, but here this word thunderbolt, it simply suggests the sound of thunder. So it can be taken as an example for auditory imagery. So what are the symbols? Now you know that the bird eagle is a symbol for a lot of things we discussed in the introduction to the poem. And apart from that, you can take thunderbolt. Thunderbolt as a symbol for the negative aspects of nature as well. And the other elements of nature like the sun. Sun is a symbol for life, right? And also sun is a symbol for power as well, right? And then the rhyme scheme. Rhyme scheme is a regular rhyme scheme. Now look at these three words in the first stanza. Hands, land, stands. A. And if you take the second stanza, crows, walls, falls, all the words rhyme B. So the rhyme scheme is A, B. Then parallelism is, it's a kind of a technique or a figure of speech used by the writers. Parallelism is where the same grammatical structure is used in a sentence or series of sentences. Now here he clasps, the same pattern is used here, he stands, right? And in the second stanza, he watches, the same pattern is used. In this line, he falls. So these two are examples for parallelism. Then alliteration. Alliteration, assonance, and consonance, all these are sound devices. Alliteration is where a consonant sound is repeated in the beginning line of a poetry. So here, clasp, crag, crooked. K sound is repeated. So it's a good example, very powerful example for alliteration. And in the second line, lonely lands. L is repeated in the beginning. And then what are the other here? Watches, walls. V sound is repeated. So these are examples of alliteration. Then let's see assonance. Assonance is where vowel sound is repeated, right? Now here, clasp, crag, hands. A sound is repeated. Clasp, crag, hands. It's a good example for assonance. Then close to the sun in lonely lands. Close, lonely. O sound is repeated in this line, right? Okay. Then consonants are, once again, consonant sound is repeated, but it does not have to be in the beginning of a word. Now here this whole line can be taken as an example for consonants. Close, lonely lands. Why? L sound is repeated, and you can take close and lands. Why? S sound is repeated. Right? So these are the techniques the writer has used in this beautiful poem, The Eagle. I hope all the themes, techniques are very clear to you now.